So this talk hopefully will shed some insights into that, and really to understand more about how open source works at AWS, we kind of need to really dive into kind of the culture. So at Amazon, for those people who aren't familiar, we have these 16 leadership principles that form the basis of actually how everything is done, from both hiring and finding people to day-to-day interactions. It's kind of like the common vocabulary we all have. And these also influence, actually, interestingly, open source. So I'm going to go through these. I'm not going to cover all of them. I'm just going to cover the most pertinent ones. So the first and our most critical one, actually, and you mentioned it, Ron, about customer obsession. So what this actually means for us as an organization is that we obsess and work backwards from customer needs. We don't lead with the cool tech, maybe what other people are doing, and we don't focus on short-term stuff. We aim to build stuff and relationships with customers that can outlast any of us. And we have this concept of working backwards to really deeply understand their needs, their pain points, and frustrations. And in the context of open source, this actually has a few interesting connotations. The first one is that we know that, and you've mentioned it, that customers and developers are really enthusiastic users and creators of open source software. And so because we work backwards from our customers and we listen to them, increasingly, what we're finding is that they also love and use open source. We have this thing that where 90% of the AWS roadmap is driven by customer feedback. And so if customers are demanding and interested in open source, that means we look to see how we can help them. And often that leads to creation of things like managed services to make it easier for them. And they actually tell us that they love the choice when it comes to how they want to run those open source workloads. For some, they actually want to run it themselves, and for others, it might be a different approach. And there are literally so many open source software out there. Making it easy for customers is really important. And kind of one of the key areas that I think that defines customer obsession is wanting to kind of understand what the pain points customers have, and then address those and tackle those. So in the context of open source, one of the common things that I have heard and continue to hear is that there's one thing running an open source software, but there's a lot of undifferentiated heavy lifting, right? There's installation, configuration, patching, security, scaling up, scaling down. And whilst customers love these open source projects, quite often all they want to do is focus on actually just using it. And I can kind of provide a nice example of something I've been working on quite a lot over the last couple of years, which is Apache Airflow, which is a very, very popular and well-loved open source project. It's a workflow orchestrator being used by data engineers all over the world, increasingly popular. And our customers want choice. And so that choice might be that they want to manage Apache Airflow themselves. And so in this context, we have AWS solutions architects and even folks like myself who actually create content that actually allow you to take the open source upstream project and then deploy it on AWS in a number of different configurations that are production ready. But for some customers, they actually don't want to do that. Some customers just want a managed service. And so a few years ago, we launched one of our managed services. Apache Airflow is quite a complicated architecture and application to manage at scale. And so, we have removed all that undifferentiated heavy lifting and made it really easy for people to just pick it up and use. We also create projects as well to help. We have a dedicated team of engineers that actually work upstream in the project. And we also create projects that help developers use this. And we make those available via Apache 2 licenses. So that's kind of working from the first and most important LP, customer obsession. We move on to kind of the next one, which is kind of earn trust. And, today customers use and depend open source software, but it's easy to remember. I've been in this game for over 20 years, and it's not always been that way. It wasn't that long ago that when I was working and engaging with organizations, they had specific policies around the banning of open source software, and so one of the things that I certainly used to find was we were always looking for validation. We were always looking for those case studies where big organizations had taken that leap of faith and were using open source software. And cloud itself, AWS was built on open source technologies, and because of that, it has increasingly become a really important way to show that open source can scale and is ready for the most demanding workloads. And so in this instance, cloud has really become a force multiplier to enable confidence and trust in those open source technologies. And another effect of that force multiplier is actually how, as part of that, we're increasingly helping customers with tools and services to help them move from proprietary solutions to open source solutions. And here's just a couple of examples of some of the tools that we're producing. And so this again helps customers take that journey to its next logical conclusion and move away from those proprietary softwares. And more recently, we did this with Babelfish that allows folk to move from SQL Server to Postgres. Now, a couple of years ago, we actually joined the Open Invention Network. So this is an organization, for those that aren't familiar, that actually pulls technology patents, and really, it helps kind of make sure that everyone feels much more comfortable about the technologies they're using aren't suddenly going to be taken away from them. And Amazon is committed to pulling its entire patent pool in ONI and around it, where we has defined open source projects. And so really what we're trying to say there to everyone and to our customers is that we're committed to protecting and fostering that open source. I think another final example of kind of like earning trust is how we approach security. And security at AWS is our most important priority. And so kind of we take these kind of three approaches for making sure that the open source software that we work with is secure. The first one is we work upstream with projects and provide engineering, good practices, that kind of thing. So examples like the Amazon Corretto cryptographic provider, which allows you to do much more improved cryptographic operations in Java, or leadership of SIG security and the security response team, or even things like the Carney and Rust that help you verify properties of code. Are ways of how we're working upstream. But we also contribute projects that help organizations improve their security posture. So S2N and AWS LC, which are a cryptographic library, help anyone use those as the basis for building cryptographic providers, or SnapChange, which allows you to do fuzzy searching and detect bugs in your code that you might ordinarily miss. And then finally, Postgres Trusted Language Extensions, easy for me to say, is a tool that any Postgres user can take and provides an ability to run extensions which Postgres developers love in a safe way. And we're also providing financial help. So whether it's money provided to OpenSSF as part of the scorecarding, or helping for audits, and also for well-known tools to be rewritten in memory-safe languages like Rust. Kind of the next leadership principle really is around invent and simplify. And AWS has always been an organization that's aimed to take stuff that's traditionally very complex or cost prohibitive and make it easier for other people to adopt. And just because you've got access to the source code doesn't necessarily mean that everyone can use it. I think this is a well-known myth. There is still work to be done. There's no concept of free as in free puppy, right? And when you take a look at kind of the types of things that you typically need to do, it's easy to forget that there's a lot of stuff that needs to happen before you can actually start using your open source software. And that kind of leads nicely into kind of the next leadership principle, which is actually how AWS insists on the higher standards in the work we do, and that carries on into how we build services to meet the very high needs of multi-tenanted operations. There's an expectation our customers have that when they use a service from AWS, a managed service, it's going to be highly scalable and it's going to be performant. And so we have created a number of managed services across a number of different areas that build upon that and allow customers to use these open source software at scale. And also, of course, remember, this also provides confidence in those open source technologies as well. And I think a good example of that is the work we've been doing with the Lucene project, which powers the Amazon.com search. And we have, kind of committers to the Lucene project. And because we've run it at scale, we have been able to detect rough edges, bugs, and other issues. Mike McCandless, who one of our senior engineers and a long-term contributor, has written various posts about this. Now, one of the interesting things about how we do open source AWS is around this LP ownership. So we are and want to engage in open source in a way that is here for the long term. And so at AWS, we do have a very strong bias for ownership. And so we have this concept of like one-way and two-way doors. And for people who are familiar with Amazon culture, a two-way door is something decision you can make, but typically can come back from quite easily. You may lose some money or some time. But one-way doors are really big deals, right? You don't go into them lightly. And the way we treat open source is a one-way door. So we treat it as a long commitment. And we can see that in things like our commitment to long-term support and engagement with OpenJDK, where we have been one of the largest contributors for that project, both from upstream contributions as well as new capabilities and features. Now, alongside our LPs, we also have a peculiar culture. At Amazon, we hire builders, we hire those people that like to take on challenges, difficult challenges, who like to question the status quo. And quite often, a lot of those builders are folk who work in open source. And this is just a small selection of those people who work within our organization who are significant contributors into open source projects and the community. Another aspect of our kind of culture is this thing and concept called two-peter teams, where we create very small teams who are very nimble, very agile, and also very autonomous, and empower them to have a kind of like a startup mentality. And what this leads to is the creation of large numbers of open source projects across different areas, so compute, data, machine learning, security, and all the other ones that are there. One of my most favorite ones, and one of the ones I'm talking about here in my little sort of mini trip in Asia, is Cedar, which allows you, it's an open source domain language and authorization engine that solves a really sort of important problem, which is how you can confidently incorporate authorization within your applications. It's built in Rust using formal verification. And so we can actually, for the first time, prove correctness around authorization decisions. It's a really, really nice project. And another one I've been using recently as well is Finch, which is effectively my Docker replacement. But we have other tools such as Carpenter that allows folks who are using containers to optimize their cost by choosing better compute resources. We have security-related projects like Bottle Rocket, which is a very optimized OS for running containers on the host. And then we've got micro machine projects like Firecracker, which is used by us, but also is really fascinating how we're seeing other people use this in really different use cases. One of the best ones has been in how it's being used in CI/CD systems to reduce the startup time from containers when running tests. So,
Ricardo,
yes.
one question. I want to keep this interactive. I'm going to see if Robert Hood, Robert, he's one of the leading cloud security architects with Hood up there in New England, previously with BJ's. When you were alluding to all of these different platforms, his biggest issue is licensing. And it's one hand when you've got to worry about your AWS licenses. Now you've got all these different platforms. Robert, is there anything you want to add? And maybe I'll even open up to Anil and Dwayne to comment on that, because as you're talking about all these different replacements, it raises the question of how do you control that and make sure you're in compliance with your corporate standards?
Yeah, one of the biggest issues we've had here at my company is basically licenses. The problem being there are some license types that are absolutely not good for enterprise.
Yeah.
The
So
stuff
AGPL, right?
up left
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, Robert, well, I'm going to
Yep.
even open this up to Dwayne or Neil, where they can comment.
Do we
Each of
want to
these.
park those questions to the end? Because I'm just conscious from the point of view of like finishing the talk first. It might make sense
That's
to.
fine. Maybe you'll cover this. I thought it might be an appropriate comment, and we'll
I think
keep
that's
you.
that's a deeper question, and an important one, which I can absolutely provide my point of view, both from my experience both before and at AWS
That's
and
fine.
generally,
Okay,
right?
got it.
So, but yeah, it's an important question, so we'll definitely tackle it. But let's carry on. There's not many of that slides left, and it'll give us then a good time to for me to focus on the questions. So just coming up to the last few now. One of the other leadership principles we have is think big, and the way that this manifests is that we contribute to lots of different projects. Okay, we probably don't do a really great job at talking about this and sharing that with people, but that is another I guess characteristic of the Amazon culture. We tend to do rather than show, and there's not that many people in the organization that necessarily want to write about all this kind of stuff. So that's kind of my job, right? I try and share how we're doing some of these stuff. So pretty much most of the open source projects that both AWS and by extension our customers are using, AWS has engineers working in those upstream projects, and I have the privilege to engage with and work with some of those as well. We do write occasionally about them. This is a blog post recently about some of the cool stuff we're doing in the Postgres community. And Jonathan Katz at the last Open Source Summit in Bilbao did a keynote on this. And more recently, we've been working with MariaDB, both on contributions as well as financial support. I bumped into Mike from MariaDB actually at FOSSACIA, and he was ever so grateful for the kind of work we're doing there. So just to kind of wrap things up, this is kind of how we kind of think about open source AWS, is that if you think about it, open source is everywhere. And so therefore it's really important, both for us as an organization, but also for our customers, but more than that, broader than that, okay, it's the whole world. And we've seen that recently with, some of these exploits. And so for these reasons, we are investing and continue to invest in open source across all the things I've talked about, and we'll see more. Come and join us and experience how cloud and open source, for me, is really the future of IT. I have a weekly newsletter where I share some of the stuff we're doing on open source. So if you're interested in diving deeper in this, then you can grab the link there. And with that, I can absolutely, open up for questions. If you want copies of the slide, if you complete this short survey, you'll get a copy of the slide. And with that, Ron, I think I'm on time and ready for some questions.
Yep.